Good evening, everyone. So, this is again our weekly current affairs roundup class. And I think it's already 7:04, so we should start now. People can join in as and when they come. So, can you all tell me what was one big international news that happened over the last 7 to 10 days or so? So, in today's current affairs session, what I will do is the initial few minutes I'm going to particularly spend discussing the AUKUS agreement and also some lessons or implications from that for India. And then we will move on to discuss some 8 other smaller news items which happened this week. So this is our broad agenda for today, and we will try to wrap up the session in around 50 minutes to 1 hour. So I'll just share my screen now and we will begin with our session, okay? Can all of you see my screen? Okay, good. So as I said, I will start with the AUKUS agreement first, and then we will move on to some other discussions. Okay, thank you, everyone. So what are the things that we need to know regarding this AUKUS agreement? Let's begin with that. So as the name itself tells you about the countries that are involved. So first we have Australia, then we have UK, and then we have US. And what is the overall nature of this deal? It is very clear that this is in the nature of a defense deal or a security deal. And it was signed on September 16th. Quite a surprise. It came as quite a surprise, the deal, when it was announced. And what is the purpose behind this agreement or this deal? It is to provide nuclear powered submarines to Australia. Now, one question that came up here was basically which was the country which became very angry because of this AUKUS agreement? France, right. So why did France become angry? The reason for that was, yes, Australia already had a deal with France which was cancelled and this AUKUS agreement was signed. Basically, the difference was that the deal which existed with France dealt with conventional submarines. And in a short while, I'll tell you what is the difference between a conventional submarine and a nuclear powered submarine. So this conventional submarine deal was cancelled that existed with France and this new agreement was signed. So obviously there were certain reasons which we will come to shortly that made France very angry with this move, and France also recalled its envoys from USA and Australia, if you have read recently, after this deal. So one question that comes up is that why did Australia even need nuclear powered submarine? So unlike India, Australia is not kind of living in a very security threatened environment. We are living in a geography where we are surrounded by Pakistan, we are surrounded by China, but Australia is not living in that kind of a geography. So why did Australia even need this nuclear powered submarine? This is one question that we need to understand. So the first and most obvious response to this is that Australia is feeling threatened from China. And that is the reason that it went ahead with this nuclear submarine deal. Now see, earlier, the relations between Australia and China were actually quite good. In fact, China was Australia's largest trading partner. But over the years, particularly during the time of the COVID, the relationship has not been that well. Can you give me one incident that happened between Australia and China during the COVID time, if you remember? Yes, WHO, what happened was that Australia wanted a probe by the WHO into the origins of the coronavirus. And this obviously did not go down well with China. China retaliated, and what they did is they cancelled some visas of students who were studying, Australian students who were studying in China, and all that happened. And Australia also, as you know, that during the COVID, many countries became very concerned about their supply chains being dependent on China, particularly with respect to the active pharmaceutical ingredients or even getting supplies like masks and all. All these supply chains were dependent on China. So Australia has also become a part of this supply chain resilience initiative with India. So right now we see some strains in the relationship between Australia and China. Another thing is that China is becoming very assertive in its terms of its naval power and presence in the sea. So for example, it is, entering into the domain of the Pacific. And of course, in the South China Sea, it is already in conflict with states like Philippines. So because of this, it is entering now into the domain of which was, earlier within Russia, Australia's influence in the Pacific. So this is also a reason why Australia felt the need to get this nuclear powered submarine. So, what will this nuclear powered submarine provide to Australia? It will strengthen the capacity of the Australian Navy. How will it strengthen? The Australian Navy can now take operations very far away from the shores of Australia into, say, even the South China Sea. So, that way, it will help them in countering China's influence. Is this picture clear as to why Australia needed this nuclear powered submarine? Okay. Now, let me explain to you a little bit of the difference between a nuclear powered submarine and a conventional submarine, because Australia was already having the conventional submarine deal with France. So, what was the need to cancel it and go for this nuclear powered submarine? See, a submarine, the most effective thing about a submarine is its stealth feature. That is, it Venkatesh, you are raising your hand. I am not sure why. Can you just drop a message why you're raising? So, the stealth feature is the main thing with respect to a nuclear powered submarine. I mean, what is meant by stealth? See, a submarine is effective, most effective when it is hidden from the enemy's radar. And a nuclear powered submarine can remain submerged in the water for much longer than conventional submarine. Conventional submarines are generally powered with a diesel battery. Now, this diesel battery needs to be charged and it needs the fuel resupply. Because of that, they have to come to the surface repeatedly, which is not the case with a nuclear powered submarine. They can go for months underwater. They only have to come back to the shore when maintenance is required. So that is why if Australia gets access to nuclear powered submarine, they can go much longer and for much away from the shores of Australia to undertake operations. So obviously this will enhance the capacity of the Australian Navy. So generally what we say is that the main difference between a conventional submarine and a nuclear submarine is this endurance factor. That is, it can remain underwater for long. Of course, it also has better capacity for weapon storage and with respect to speed. So is this clear to you? What is the difference between a nuclear submarine and a conventional submarine? Any doubts? Okay. Others apart from Shirisha? Okay. So now coming to why has this move irked France? Of course, France is angry because the deal with France was cancelled. But the reason why France became angry was there was a huge financial loss for France. See, the deal between France and Australia that existed for this conventional submarine was worth 66 billion US dollars. So it was a very big deal for the French naval industry. So the cancellation of this deal came as a big shock to France. Also, you can see this picture here. There were, statements by French politicians saying that it is a stab in the back by France. And some politicians in France even went to the extent of saying that, this is such a rash move that we were not even informed about it. And this kind of a thing could have been expected under President Trump, but this is coming under President Biden. So overall, mainly the reason why France also got miffed with this agreement was because of the financial component involved. And when this agreement was signed between Australia and France, there was a lot of publicity about it. It was called the contract of the century. So you can understand that, a country would feel that its international prestige going down when someone cancels a deal like this. And overall, also, France has been a very active partner in the Indo Pacific, not just with Australia, even with India. When I will teach you the Indo Pacific, I will tell you that, India and France are also collaborating a lot in the Western Indian Ocean, where you have your African countries like Madagascar. So, France is an important partner in the Indo Pacific. It's a strategic partner in the Indo Pacific. So, canceling this deal with France has obviously not gone down well with the country. So these are some of the reasons why France has not been happy with the deal. But one of the things that our syllabus mentions is that whenever we have to study about any developments related to developed countries or developing countries, we have to see how it affects India's interest. Can you think of any, what do you think can be India? How do you think India can be impacted because of this AUKUS agreement? Any one point that you can think of? Quad, okay, what in relation to quad? Importance of quad. So one of the questions that is coming up is that, see, the announcement of this deal came just a few, that Prime Minister Modi has gone to New York, and he's already addressed, I think today or tomorrow he's addressing the UN General Assembly, and after that there is the first in-person meeting of quad leaders. So one is that the announcement is coming just a few days before the in-person summit of quad. So one argument that is being given is that, see, already quad does not have a very clearly defined objective. Countries have gone forward and backward. They have taken one step backward, one step forward, two steps backward when it has come to quad over many years. It is only in the last 2-3 years that quad has actually, so many meetings have happened about with respect to quad leaders. And Australia, for instance, earlier used to sometimes join the Malabar exercise, but again it used to withdraw from the Malabar exercise. So yes, one aspect is whether quad is again getting sidelined with this agreement. So this is one side. Another thing is that, yes, as you all pointed out, the exclusion of India and Japan. So, whether this is about the, these developed countries, the English speaking countries coming together and sidelining India and Japan, that becomes one aspect. One more important thing to which I will draw your attention, and this has been taken up by some commentators and writers of foreign policy, that that India and US have overall had a good relationship when it comes to defense relations. However, this has been more of a rhetoric than reality. What I mean by this is, that we are a major defense partner. US considers India a major defense partner. We have signed these foundational pacts like BECA, COMCASA with US. However, you will notice that despite signing all of these things with US and having, US recognizing India as a major defense partner, US has not actually transferred in any substantial amount any high-end technology to India. In fact, this nuclear powered submarine technology had earlier at one point been denied to India by US. And now, US is going ahead and giving this kind of a technology to Australia. So these are some of the things that are kind of lessons for India. So as you would have seen that right after this AUKUS agreement happened, India has actually been talking to France, and India has emphasized upon, the importance of our relationship with France, because we are also right now in this situation of, being stuck between two of our friends fighting. So many of you, personal life would have had this situation. So we currently have a good relationship with France also, and with UK, US, and Australia. So kind of India's position is being stuck between two friends fighting. But this were the not so positive impacts. Are there any? No, sorry, not so. Yeah, not so positive impact. Are there any good impact with respect to the AUKUS agreement for India? Is there a good side to it? These were some of the lessons for India, but what can be a actual positive impact of this for India? Yes, more security in the Indian Ocean region. Excellent point. See, anyways, Australia is a part of us, part with of I mean, we are together a part with Quad. So a strong Australia, a strong naval power in Australia is good for the security of the Indian Ocean region. Also, one term I will tell you now, and we will again do it when we cover our IR, is minilateral. See, the Indo-Pacific region has a lot of these issue-based ad hoc groups. The difference between unilateral and a multilateral organization, UN is a multilateral organization. It has a specific agenda, it has a specific structure. There are many countries that are participating. It is very formal. But when you see institutions like Quad or this AUKUS, these are all called mini laterals in the sense that they are not very formal. They don't have a secretariat. These are issue based, kind of mostly formed for countering the threat of China. So, overall, in the Indo Pacific, these mini laterals are developing. And along with Quad, we can say that AUKUS will probably also strengthen the capabilities of the Quad countries because it is also bringing in the strength of UK, which is officially not a part of Quad. Is this idea of minilateral clear? Okay, sometimes when you are writing your answers, these are very IR specific terms. It is good to use such words in your answers. Like, as I always say, that different papers of UPSC have very specific vocabulary. So, these are some things of IR vocabulary that you can develop. I hope you can write it down somewhere in your notes also. Okay, you will find many scholarly articles also related to this, particularly if you are a PSI or optional student. So is the whole picture related to the AUKUS agreement clear to you? So there are few things. What did we study? First, you need to know what is the agreement about. Second, you needed to know why Australia has entered into this agreement. Third, you needed to know the difference between a conventional and a nuclear submarine and what are the lessons in it for India. This much is enough for your general studies paper. Okay. Now, I want to ask one question. Does India have nuclear powered submarine? And if yes, then what is the name of that submarine? Okay, I'll give you the answer here. Have you heard of Arihant? INS Arihant? Huh. So INS Arihant is India's nuclear powered submarine. We have, so INS Arihant is already commissioned. We have another one that is in the development state that is called Arighat. This is not yet commissioned. This is being developed. So actually, it is important for you to know about INS Arihant because we say that after we got, and this was indigenously developed, by the way, after INS Arihant was developed, India has completed its nuclear triad. Now, what is meant by nuclear triad is that any country that can launch nuclear missiles from all the three areas, that is land, air, and sea. So with INS Arihant, India's nuclear triad is complete. So INS Arihant is the submarine, and the compatible nuclear missiles with that is your Sagarika. And you also have another one, I think it's K4, yeah, K4. So these are the names of the missiles, and Arihant is the name of the submarine. One more thing, India is so the other five, there are 6 countries in the world currently which possess these nuclear powered submarine. For now, we are excluding Australia because it is yet to get the technology. So India is the only country that is not a P5 nation that possesses nuclear powered submarine. The rest of the 5 countries are your permanent members of the Security Council. Okay, clear? Yes, Ravi, you were right. INS Arihant. So this is also a related information that you need to know with respect to this AUKUS agreement. So this was all related to the AUKUS agreement. Now we'll move on to some more current affairs. This was another defense related thing in news, that was the anti-tank guided missile Helena. See, the name of the anti-tank guided missile that we have is Nag. Helena is the helicopter launched version of it. Okay. So this is also indigenously developed, and it is an anti-tank guided missile. What is the objective of any anti-tank guided missile? Tanks, as you know, are very heavily armored vehicles. So any anti-tank guided missile means it is meant to destroy the tanks. Okay, it is meant to destroy the tanks in a war, which are very heavily armored vehicles. Now, one extra information that I would want to give you here is that you will often hear with respect to these anti-tank guided missile that Helena or Nag, these are called third generation. These are all third generation missiles. Have you heard of this first generation, second generation? Okay. So generally, when you will start studying your internal security and your defense, this is something that you will come across many times. This is a first generation weapon system, second generation weapon system. There is a very obvious difference between this difference, the distinction that we made between first, second, third generation. You don't need to know the names because no one is going to ask you which was the first generation missile. But just for your own understanding, the difference as we move from, say, first to third generation is a very obvious one. That is, the technology that is used in these missiles improve. So, for example, if I were to tell you what a first generation anti-tank guided missile would be like, it would be manual. That is, for example, suppose I am the person, there is a armored tank coming from the Pakistani side, and I am the person who's going to be launching this missile. I will have to be very close to the target, which would mean that there is a chance of me being harmed with that tank that is coming. These were very manual. The first generation relied a lot on the manual effort. But as you move to the second generation, the technology slightly improves. You have the rate. So for the second generation, you will have the use of radio and wired technology. You will have a small screen installed. So it is kind of from manual, you move to semi-automatic. Then you have third generation, which is what we are presently at. Third generation is even more advanced. This is using your laser technology. And this is something we called fire and forget. You will read this many times in your newspaper, fire and forget. Fire and forget means that the operator can retract. So once I have fired it, it does not require any more guidance. It is capable of hitting the armored tank by itself. So it does not need any more guidance once it is fired by the operator. Internet of Things. No, not. I don't think it's installed with Internet of Things, but as far as I know, they are installed with laser technology. Internet of Things will be too advanced. I think that will be like fourth generation. So as you move from first to third generation, first you have a very manual system, then you have a semi-automatic system, then you have the fire and forget. You will do all these things in more details when you are studying the defense technology. But for now, I hope you got the basic gist of what these different generations of anti-tank guided missile do. Internet of Things will be a fourth generation one. We are not there yet. Is it clear so far? Okay. Yeah, we need not, know as much as a military technology person. But for our purposes, given that the nature of our exam is also very generalist exam, this much idea we should have. Okay. Now coming to one scheme. Now the scheme has been in news that is called the Nipun Bharat. Very simple scheme that you can easily remember. What the scheme is about is basically to improve the foundational learning of children. Foundational learning means your basic reading and basic mathematical skills. And for which age group this is? This is from 3 years to 9 years, basically till third standard. So by the end of third standard, a child should have developed their basic literacy skill, that is their basic proficiency in reading and numeracy. And what is the time frame that is set to achieve this scheme? This is 2026 to 2027. So by this year, all children who are in grade 3 should develop their foundational learning ability. Now, this scheme is within the framework of another very broad umbrella scheme that is called Samagra Shiksha. So, Samagra Shiksha is the broader scheme, and Nipun Bharat is the scheme within the Samagra Shiksha scheme. Samagra Shiksha scheme has many other aims as well. It includes foundational literacy, it includes monitoring the progress of students, it also includes teacher training. So, that's the broader umbrella scheme. So, this is a small diagram that is showing you why foundational literacy is so important for India. And look at this statistic. It's saying that 55% of India's school-going children cannot read and understand a short age-appropriate text by class 5. And World Bank has given this learning poverty index, which is showing that such like more than 50% of India's children are not able to attain this foundational literacy by the time they are reaching grade 5. So you can understand how alarming this is, and particularly becomes important because we are reading this in a COVID situation where so many children from underprivileged background have not had the privilege of accessing online education. And you will read many reports that have come that children have actually who have not had access to online education have forgotten what they had learned. This has almost become a 2-year break for them. So this scheme, that is why it becomes very important for us. Next thing that was in news is this global innovation ranking. So global innovation ranking is released by an organization called the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Now, this WIPO, is it a UN organization or not? No. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, you're slightly mistaken here. There are some specialized agencies of the United Nations. And the World Intellectual Property Organization is actually a specialized agency of UN. You have many other specialized agencies, like you have the International Telecommunication Union, even WHO is a specialized agency of UN. So it is related to UN, it's a specialized agency of UN. When you prepare for your prelims for next year, you should know the specialized agencies of UN so that you are not confused in the examination. So this WIPO is the body that releases this global innovation ranking. And basically what you need to know is that India's rank has improved. We were earlier on the 48th spot. Now we are on the 46th spot. And we have been the second most innovative lower middle income country. However, China, Hong Kong, these countries have done far and way better than us. And I'll just show you the ranking. So one thing, you can just go through this infographic that I've put here. So this is showing us on what basis the ranking is done. We need not remember it by heart, but just to get an idea. See, this innovation ranking is done on the basis of two things. There are some input factors and there are some output factors. So input is, if you want to see innovation in your country, in what should you invest? You have to invest in good building good institutions, in human capital research, in infrastructure, in business market. These are the areas where you have to make your input, where you have to invest. And once you do that, what kind of output you would get? You would get knowledge output, you would get creativity outputs. So this is how this index is measured. Now, coming to the overall ranking, if you will see, Switzerland has performed the best, followed by Sweden, US, UK. And just look at in Asia, Singapore has 8th rank, China has 12th rank, Japan 13th, Hong Kong, uh, I don't know, China is here again. Hong Kong and Japan are in the 13th position. So overall, you can see that India's performance is not that great when it comes to the other Asian countries like China and Japan. But overall, yes, compared to other lower middle income countries, we have done relatively well. Now, one question that I have for you here is, whenever we are studying any index, we should not just learn about that particular index, but we should know about any other related index. So whenever you're studying the Global Innovation Index, you should know about the Indian Innovation Index. So can you answer this question, that this India Innovation Index is released by which of the following bodies? You have 4 options here before you. Niti Aayog. Yes, A is absolutely correct. It's Niti Aayog. And the Niti Aayog index more or less takes the same parameters as the Global Innovation Index, with some minor differences to suit it more to the Indian situation. For example, the Niti Aayog index takes into consideration demographic dividend, which is not there in your global index. So this is to adjust this with respect to the Indian scenario. Okay. Moving on. I hope whatever we covered till now is clear to you. Rank of India is 46th. Here, sorry, this slide for some reason has this 46th is India's position. India stands at 46th. Earlier in 2020, we were in the 48th position. Now we have improved to 46th. Are the things that we have done so far clear? Okay. See, input output was just something that I wanted to show you, in the sense ki just, I mean, you forget about this index. If you just think for yourself that if I have to create innovation in a country, suppose I have to create innovation in India, what are the things that I need to do? I will need to create good educational and research institutions where that innovation can happen. I have to create good laboratories where innovation can happen. My businesses have to be driven to create innovation. I have to protect the intellectual property for innovation. I have to, have good institutions like IISc, IITs, where people can do research. So all of these things become your input that you have to do for innovation. Now, once you have done these inputs, the result that you are going to get. So you have created good infrastructure, you have created good academic institutions, you have created a good, intellectual property protection system. Then the result that you will get out of it is that your country will develop new technologies. Your researchers are going to get their research patented. Lot of scientific journals are going to come about. So that is going to be your output. And that is basically what is being done in this index. And there are some very specific points that you don't need to remember exactly. Missile and submarine. Is it clear, Kaumudi, now? Okay. See, missile is your submarine, is your delivery system. Up, you can imagine your submarine as your, say, rocket. Your rocket is a delivery system. The rocket itself does not have the power to go and attack and destroy something. Similarly, the submarine itself cannot go and attack and destroy something. But the missile that is attached to the submarine, missile is going to be what is going to actually do the destruction. So So the submarine is the delivery system, or submarine also, you can use a submarine to go and see what are the enemy movements that are happening, because it is going to be submerged. So it can see what enemy movements are happening, whether Chinese naval ships are moving towards the okay, yeah, just unmute yourself and then you can mute yourself. So submarine can detect these enemy movements and it can be a delivery system, but the missile is actually going to be the one that will go ahead and destroy. See, I have a suggestion for you. If you cannot imagine how a submarine functions, in your free time, if you can and if you understand Hindi, there's a movie called Ghazi Attack. You can go and watch that movie. So it's basically the entire movie is shot around a submarine. So once you watch that movie, you can you can picturize it in your mind as to what a submarine is like. But is it clear now? Basically, what is the difference between a missile and submarine? No, submarine, you can call it an underwater missile launching vehicle. Yes, that you can call it, right? I thought you were calling it an underwater missile.
Ma'am, can I ask a doubt now?
Yeah, please quickly go ahead.
Ma'am, as recently our honorable Prime Minister has visited US and visit to US, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, in the context of international relations,
Mm-hmm.
to what extent was to make our current affairs notes and to in international relations point of view, till what are the issues we need to concentrate for our mains exam of prelims coming 2022 prelims exam or mains exam? What are the main issues where we need to identify and supposed to work on it
Got it. So,
based on the Prime Minister?
Yashwant, I'll take your question at the end of the session if you don't mind. Once we finish all the topics, after that we will take it up. Is that fine?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, ma'am. Yeah.
So I don't know if everybody got his question. What he's asking is that, now that the Prime Minister is visiting New York, if there are any such visits in future also that you have to read about, what is the important things that you need to take note of for your prelims and your mains exam? Okay, this is what his question was. So I'll answer that at the end of the session. So is the difference between a submarine and a missile somewhat clear now? And Jaydev, yes, what you were writing is correct. Okay. Have any of you watched that movie Ghazi Attack? It is not a very great movie, but can give you a good idea of how a submarine works. Yeah, so if any of you are very confused about it, you can go ahead and watch it in your free time if on any day you're bored of studying. Now, coming to this faster system of the Supreme Court. So this is basically the name itself is telling you what it is: faster and secure transmission of electronic records. What it intends to do is, you would have read about this a lot in news, particularly these days, that Supreme Court issues the bail order, but it does not reach the jail authorities. So if the Supreme Court is issuing the bail order on a Friday, the person is still in jail till Monday. The reason being that the bail order has not reached the jail authorities. So this delay happens, and sometimes there are some other reasons also behind this delay, but without getting into those. So now what they are going to try and do is, electronically they will communicate. So instead of the jail authorities having to wait for receiving the bail order from the court, it will now be electronically transmitted to them. So this will ensure that someone is not spending more time in jail even after they have received their bail order. So not just in terms of bail order, all other kinds of communication between the court and the police authorities and the jail authorities can now be done electronically. This is what this faster system is all about. And of course, why is it important? It is important because there will now be no delays in the implementation of orders of the court. This will ensure that no one has to wait behind the bars because the jail authorities have not received a hard copy of the report. This will be a better protection of our fundamental rights as well. So these are some of the reasons why this system becomes significant. Now again, because this faster system is in news, I have included some two of the more initiatives related to the Supreme Court that you should know about. So one initiative is this one. It is known as the SuSpace, that is Supreme Court Portal for Assistance in Courts Efficiency. Now, what this is about, this is actually AI driven, artificial intelligence driven. And suppose a judge has to make reference to some old case or some old facts. So, this AI driven tool can actually bring those old cases or old laws for the judge to refer to. So, this is one initiative that has come up. Another is this scheme known as Subhash. It is Supreme Court's Vidhik Anuvad software. Can any of you guess what this Anuvad software is for? If you know the Hindi meaning of the term, you can easily answer. Translate, bilkul, absolutely. It is for translating the court orders into vernacular languages. So this is the purpose of this Subhash portal. So these are, because the faster scheme was in news, these are two related things as well that you need to read about. Coming to one more, this is that the Indian military contingent participated in the 6th edition of the SCO exercise. So, you know that there are many military exercises that happen, like we have the Malabar exercise. So, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has a military exercise that is known as Peaceful Mission. And this version of Peaceful Mission was held in Russia. So the Indian contingent participated in this military exercise. And what was the purpose behind it? It was a joint counter-terrorism exercise. This was the 6th edition. India has not participated in all the 6th editions. India started participating from the 5th edition onwards. So this was the second time that India participated. And what is the purpose behind this exercise? See, the purpose behind any joint military exercise is always to improve interoperability. So also closer relationship between the SCO member states to enhance the abilities of the leaders for this multinational military contingent. So basically, so that these countries, even in future, if there is any security related issue of there, or if there is any humanitarian disaster, they can together take up some exercises. So that is usually the main purpose. And one of them was also this counter-terrorism. So just remember that the Peaceful Mission exercise is associated with which organization? SCO. Generally, the objective is not going to be asked because they are very generic, but you can be asked as to which body it is related to. So it is related to the SCO. Now, in addition to this, there was also the 21st summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, about which we need to know one very important fact. Let me see if you have read about it. Can you tell me which country has been accepted as a full member of the SCO this year in the 21st summit that has just been held? Iran, excellent. Iran has now become a full member of the SCO. So this is a very important development that came from the 21st SCO summit. Other than this, the discussion points in the 21st summit were mostly related to the situation in Afghanistan. India particularly referred to the issue of terrorism. So nothing very significant there, but what is very significant for you to know is this Iran, that Iran has now become a full member. Which Central Asian country is not a part of SCO? Four Central Asian republics are part of SCO, one of them is not. Excellent. Turkmenistan is not a part of SCO. Your Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. These are part of SCO, but Turkmenistan is not a part of SCO. Another thing to know about SCO is this RATS. What is the full form of this RATS? Anyone has an idea? Or what is it related to? Yes, it is the Regional Anti-Terrorism Structure. So overall, the SCO Secretariat or the SCO headquarters is located in China, in Shanghai, but this RATS is based out of Tashkent. So these are some related information that you need to know about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the 21st summit that was held. This is another very important issue with respect to your environment. That is, the WHO has made an update to its global air pollution standards, particularly related to two things, that is your particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10. And I'll just show you what are these changes that are made. Please remember one thing, that WHO classifies 6 classical pollutants. And these are those 6: PM 2.5, PM 10, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and carbon monoxide. Many a time students get confused, and if there is an MCQ, they often mark carbon dioxide as well. But that would be incorrect. Carbon dioxide is not included here. Instead, it is carbon monoxide. Okay. Now I'll just show you what are the changes that have been made. If you can see here, the main changes are in PM particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10. And what are these changes? Earlier, in terms of gram per cubic meter, this was 10. Now it has been reduced to 5. But just look at the National Ambient Air Quality Standard of India, where WHO is saying 5, our standards are at 40. Similarly, in the period of 24 hours, earlier it was 25, now it has been reduced to 50. Comparing India's, it is 60. And with respect to PM10, annually, 20 grams per cubic meter, now reduced to 15. 24 hour, 50, now reduced to 45. You do not have to remember these exact figures, but just know that the WHO has tightened these global air quality norms. And if you're given a question that the India's national ambient air quality standard is in sync with the WHO figures, then that statement is going to be absolutely incorrect. Okay. Yes, that's what the author is criticizing in the article. So India does not go by these standards. Apparently, our threshold for tolerating air pollution is very high. So WHO has made these changes because it was felt that, air pollution is a much more serious threat to human health than it was earlier thought to be. So keeping that in mind, these changes have been made. Now, in relation to this, there is one program of India that you need to know about. This was not in news right now, but we have to always see something related. So because the WHO has tightened the air pollution norms related to PM 2.5 and 10, we need to know about this National Clean Air Program. Can you tell me the implementing body for the National Clean Air Program? Not a okay. So it is your Central Pollution Control Board, okay, the CPCB. And what this deals with is also this PM 2.5 and 10. And what the objective is to reduce their concentration in the atmosphere by 20 to 30%. But 20 to 30% of what? So for this, we have taken 2017 as the base year. So 20 to 30% of what was the level in 2017, we are intending to reduce that. And this program was launched in 2019, and by which year we aim to achieve this? By 2024. Now, earlier this was implemented in around 102 cities. Which were these 102 cities? These cities were those which were not having good, where basically the air quality was poor, and they were called as non-attainment cities. Non-attainment cities in terms of those national ambient air quality index that I showed you. So which had performed poorly in this index, those cities were chosen, and 122 such cities, this national clean air program is being implemented. Again, I'm repeating, not currently in news in 2021, this is in 2019. But because we studied about the WHO norms, and this is also related to PM 2.5 and PM 10, you should know about it. Now, related to this Rhino Day, see, you do not need to remember when this Rhino Day is celebrated. It is 22nd September. This is not important. What was the theme? Keep the five alive. What is this five referring to here? Any idea? Yes, those five species of rhino, and we will see shortly what are those five species. So, again, as I'm saying, that you don't need to know the exact date on which this World Rhino Day is celebrated. UPSC does not ask such trivia kind of questions, but you need to know about the species of rhinos, particularly the one that is found in India. You need to know about its IUCN status, because sometimes student gets confused about it. See, these are the five species: white, black, greater one-horned rhino, which is what you find in India, Javan and Sumatran. The first two are found in Africa, and the rest are found in Asia. You don't have to memorize, the IUCN status of all of these. Just know that the greater one-horned rhino is vulnerable. Many a times in the exam, we kind of, think that it is endangered or critically endangered, but that's not the case. It is vulnerable. So this is something that you need to be aware of. And this World Rhino Day, initially, which organization started it? It was started by the WWF, World Wildlife Fund. Now, one thing, I don't know if you read this in the newspaper, on this World Rhino Day, rhino horns were burned by the Assam government. Have you read about it? It was there in Indian Express. Yes. So why did he do that? Because, rhino horns are poached in country. They are basically poachers. They kill rhinos to extract these horns. And this is then smuggled to countries like China, Vietnam. The reason being that there's a lot of misconception that these horns have some medicinal properties, some mythical medicinal properties, are imagining that it can cure cancer and whatnot. But the reason why they went ahead with burning these rhino horns were to basically send a message that there are no medicinal properties as such. That is, WWF is different from IUCN, completely different. That there are no medicinal values that are associated with these rhino horns. And these rhino horns were actually what was there in the treasury of the state. Whenever a rhino dies, these horns are preserved by the state. So there were many such rhino horns that existed in the treasury of the state. So they burned these horns to kind of send a message to the poachers that, look, there is no medicinal value as such. So this was something that was in news, and because of which this World Rhino Day was in news. One of you also rightly pointed it out. Now, when you are studying about rhinos, one other important thing to know is what are some of the initiatives that India has taken for the protection of rhinos. So one is this New Delhi Declaration that you have, that was involved many countries like India, Bhutan, Nepal, Indonesia, for the protection of the rhinos. Then India has engaged in DNA profiling of rhinos. Then National Rhino Conservation Strategy was launched in 2019. This Indian rhino vision wanted to have a wild population of 3,000 greater one-horned rhinos spread across the various protected areas of Assam. And the number that I could get hold of from 2018, I don't know if this 3000 number has been attained, but it was somewhere around the wild population of rhinos is somewhere around 2700. That is what I could find in from the data of 2018. Can you tell me which are the national parks apart from Kaziranga in Assam where the one horned rhino is found? Yes, Manas is correct. So I think you have not started with your environment yet, as in when you start, you would know more about it. But some of the others, so one is of course Kaziranga that has the highest population of rhinos. Then you have this Orang National Park. There you have rhino population. The Pobitora National Park. There you have one-horned rhino. The Manas National Park. So these are the four ones that where you find the one-horned rhinos. And the IUCN status, which I just showed you, vulnerable, correct. Coming to the last news for today, this is that the ease of doing business ranking has been stopped. So the World Bank will no longer be publishing this ease of doing business ranking. Now, why? UPSC has, as far as I remember, also once asked a question on the ease of doing business ranking. The reason why this ease of doing business, yes, we are taking only two cities, right? Delhi and Mumbai. Those were the only two cities on which these rankings were based. The reason why the World Bank has gone ahead and scrapped it is that of the 2018 rankings that were published, there have been some accusations that China's rank was falsely boosted and the data was not very accurate. So based on these kind of allegations of irregularities in the data, World Bank is no longer going to publish these rankings anymore. So let's see a little more about these rankings. See, what was the benefit that this index had for countries? For developing countries like India, when our Prime Minister was going and seeking for foreign investment, FDI, you know that particularly under Prime Minister Modi, one of the objectives that India had in the business environment was to improve our ease of doing business ranking. So whenever countries wanted to get foreign investment, they would show that they have market friendly policies and they protect the rights of investors, and this was a means to get investment. And also for a country, on the basis of your ranking, you got an idea as to how good your business environment is compared to the global best practices. So these were some of the benefits that existed because of this ease of doing business ranking. But what have been the drawbacks that we need to see? One is definitely this irregularity in data collection that has come up, particularly the accusation that the data was doctored to boost China's rank. Then, and this is something I think you've already started in your economics. Many of these rankings are done in a way that they support the free market ideas, where the market is supreme. There should be less government intervention. The impact of market has to be more. The impact of government has to be less. So these kind of indexes support this free market ideas. Strong political leaders, strong nationalist leaders were manipulating this index for their political ends. And one point very specific to India is the weakening of labor regulation in India. See, you remember during this second wave of COVID, many states had diluted their labor laws. So what happened was that some inspections that were earlier mandatory in the factories were actually done away with. And this has meant that labor laws have been diluted. There has been an increase in industrial accident. So, you don't want to have strong labor laws because you feel that that is hindering the ease of doing business. So, in a way, when there are more industrial accidents, there is less inspection by the government. You are kind of putting the health of workers at risk. So this has been also one of the drawbacks of this ease of doing business index when it comes to developing countries like India. So this was all the current affairs that I had for today. Is everything clear to you all? We covered 9 topics. Others? Okay. So I'll just take up the question that Yashwant was asking, that whenever you read about the foreign visit of the prime minister to any country, like now you will have the prime minister's visit to US. So how do you go ahead preparing for it? So let me give you a small roadmap and guide you a little bit as to how you can do that. Of course, we are also here to guide you whenever such current happenings are there. First and foremost thing, you will see lot of articles will come, articles, editorials will come before the visit. Like, have you seen many of the articles have come, what to be expected from the first in-person quad meeting, what to be expected from the prime minister's visit to US? Have you seen such articles in the newspaper in the last few days?
That's good. That's the reason most of the things. So I asked you the question: how to deal with
Yes.
such.
So first thing is the articles and editorials that are coming before the visit, before the so what is expected from the prime minister before he is speaking in the General Assembly, that is not important for you. Those are meant for newspaper analysts to write and have something to talk about. Firstly, the ones things that are coming before the visit, before the prime minister is going there, that you need not focus on. You wait for the prime minister to speak in the General Assembly. You wait for the Quad summit to happen. Then, once the summit is done, once the prime minister has spoken in the General Assembly, just make a note of 4 5 important key takeaways from that. And many a times you will see that there is nothing absolutely unique in that. Like if India is speaking at the General Assembly, then even if I'm not listening to the speech, I know that we will talk about terrorism. Okay. So 4 5 such points you just make a note of. In prelims, you are not likely to be asked unless there is some grand scheme or grand agreement that is signed. So this is just for your mains purpose. So make a note of 4 5 key takeaways from what the prime minister said, not from what some or the other commentators said. And this you will easily get from your PIB. A press note will be released by the Ministry of External Affairs, and those are already released in a point format, small paragraph format. So take 4 5 points from there. So once this objective is done, then the third thing that you can do is look at a few editorials. For example, you will see that Indian Express will come with an explained article. Like, what was the importance of the recent Quad meeting? After the meeting, when you see such articles, you don't have to make a lot of notes on it, or don't have to go through those articles for 1 month, because I'm pretty sure after this first in-person Quad summit, for the next 1 month you're going to see articles related to it. You don't spend your time for the rest 1 month collecting articles on it. You make a note of these 4 5 key points. Then if there is any one or two columnists whom you follow, maybe C. Rajamohan is a good columnist to follow, or Harsh V. Pant.
MK Narayan.
Yeah, MK Narayan. Or more importantly, this explained articles of Indian Express, they are very general. They have a lot of points. Things are, written in the form of question and answer format, in that I really like about these articles. From any of these one or two sources, from here, what you have to do, you have to find some analytical points. So facts you got from point 2, analysis you get from point 3. Maximum 2 to 3 sides of an A4 sheet paper. That's it. And your thing is done. You're done. Apart from that, if there is anything other more very significant, of course, in your weekly current affairs session also, you will go through it. But if you are making notes by yourself, this much is going to be enough for you. Please do not spend 1 month reading about what happened in the Quad Summit. It is not good use of your time. Does this make sense? Yashwant, is it clear to you now?
I got it.
Okay. Okay, everyone. So we will end our session here today. And thank you so much. Please go ahead and have your dinner and have a nice weekend. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any other questions or queries, feel free to get in touch with me. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.